I'm Juliet Birch, and I am the co-curator for the short film programs for the 2020 Washington, DC International Film Festival. Today, we're in conversation with representatives from 3 of the films in our MetroShorts program. MetroShorts puts a spotlight on filmmakers from the Metro Washington area. And this Q&A will feature filmmakers from 12 Ingredients Over the Generations, They Say I'm Your Teacher, and The First. To introduce our guests, Sam Hampton is the director of 12 Ingredients Over the Generations. Sam is a documentary filmmaker and co-founder of Docs in Progress, a Silver Spring-based nonprofit that fosters a community for documentary filmmakers. When he made The First, Mohammed Saffouri was a senior film student at George Mason University. It is his first documentary film project, and we congratulate him on winning a Capital Emmy for this project. Catherine Murphy is a co-director with Lucy Massey Phoenix of They Say I'm Your Teacher. And we're pleased to also have with us the film's editor, Emmitt Williams. Catherine is founder and director of The Literacy Project, a multimedia documentary project on adult literacy in the Americas. Emmitt has produced and edited educational films, web series, and short films around the world on a wide range of subjects, including climate change, the Black Lives Matter movement, and Standing Rock. So I thought these are 3 films that are in very different forms, and I thought we could start by having you each say something brief about the origin of your idea. Why don't we begin with Mohammed?
All right, thank you, Juliet, for this introduction, and I'm glad to be here on this session. So the origin for this film actually started when I took a documentary filmmaking class at George Mason University, and we had to make a documentary for that class. So I was thinking about a subject that would be effective to other people, and I've never had this idea of making this film about a bridesmaid running until I saw her accidentally on campus, and then I took the opportunity and I've talked to her. I told her that I'm taking a filmmaking class or the documentary filmmaking class. And I just had this idea, just popped in my head to talk to her and tell her about the idea of the film. And she was so welcoming, and she was happy to let me film her journey in the elections. And that was the origin of the story. So I just met her on campus, and then I talked to her and her campaign manager on the phone. And I listened to her story. I felt it's a really powerful story, and it has to be told in some way.
Thank you. Sam?
Well, I've made several films, usually social justice films, and I decided I was going to turn the lens to myself and tell a personal story about my family, going back through the generations. I felt it was important at this particular time to tell a story about Black people and kind of the unique lives that we have. And I just felt it was interesting how my family has changed over the generations. And so I decided to tell this story with my daughter and making a sweet potato pie. And that's the sweet potato pie is something that's been in our family for many, many years. And but it's also representative of a lot of our thoughts and culture and outlook on life. And so I decided to tell that type of story using my own family, because
the
it's
pie is the through line against the background of family change.
Yeah, and you know, in the beginning of the film, I talk about what stays and what goes, and for some reason, the pie seemed to stay over the generations, but also a lot of our own personal attitudes and work ethic and kind of the things that we value. I think it's important to see that string of how it came from my grandfather to my mother, to me, and then hopefully what I have shared with my daughter. So I've tried to make that those relationships as far as, you know, what's intrinsically important to us.
Thank you. And Catherine. Oops, I think you're still muted, Catherine.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I was saying I'm really honored and delighted that our film is in the festival this year. So our origin story is that about 5 years ago, a previous documentary I made called Maestra was programmed at Highlander Center in Tennessee. And Highlander is a social justice movement school and movement incubator that's been around since 1932. And every September they have an anniversary celebration. They include a film, and they programmed a previous film that I made. And I spent a few extra days there researching in their archives, looking for information about the South Carolina citizenship schools that were founded by Septima Clark and Esau Jenkins, Bernice Robinson, and Miles Horton. And I came across this amazing film that I didn't know of called You Got to Move, that was made by Lucy Massey Phoenix in 1985. So I embarked on a journey to find Lucy Phoenix, which took me a while, but it was really a joy to find her. And I basically proposed to her to digitize some of her archives from that film and edit something new. But what was born was a really beautiful collaboration where she's ended up wanting to pretty much take the chapters out of her original film, which is a feature doc, and make them into shorts of their own, but keeping a lot of the original editing that she had done. And she's a very important historic documentary maker, editor. She edited Rosie the Riveter and other pieces. But so that collaboration is what gave birth to this film. And then of course, working with Emmitt Williams was really a joy, and the team.
Yeah. Emmitt, on that note, can you tell us how you became part of the project? Oh, and unmute. We want to hear every word.
Well, yes. One of the best things about being a documentary filmmaker in DC is that there's a great community there of support and helping each other with projects. And I am mainly a producer and filmmaker, and I was sort of had this gap in between projects. And Catherine and I are friends, and I said, hey, do you need anything on anything? And she said, hey, I'm editing this movie, and said, hey, I edit. And so it was really simple as that. I just had a little gap between projects and just fell in love immediately with the work that she was doing and the work she's always done. So yeah, I was happy to be a part of it.
I'm interested to know how it is that each of you wanted to tell these stories now. And maybe Emmitt, you know, just from the perspective, you could weigh in on what it was like to edit this material now.
I think the most two things for me is that there's so much amazing material there that you don't want to cut anything out. Mm-hmm. You just, you know, and anything you want more, you know, I want this to be a feature because it's such an important story that needs to be told. And especially now, it's so symbolic of the history of voter suppression in America. And it's, you know, things that were going on in the 50s and, you know, before are still happening now. So you're watching all these old interviews and you're just wondering what, if anything, has changed. And so that gives it that gives you just sort of the impetus to like get it out there as soon as you can and make sure everybody sees it and sees that there's this long history and not as much has changed as you wish has changed.
Yeah. And I have to say, in my experience in watching the film, I was amazed that it's about 9 minutes, and I couldn't believe that. Like, I always felt like I had been engaged for much, much longer than that. So I thought that was an amazing feat, actually, that, you know, we had this entirely engrossing, long feeling, in a good way, experience at under 10 minutes. So Catherine, do you want to talk about that? Why now?
Yes. First of all, you know, this is 100% archive film. the 4 people that are in the film have all gone on to the ancestors. None of them are still, you know, alive, walking planet Earth. But the importance, the historical importance in terms of just US history, education history, social history of the United States, but also voting rights, the important historical voting rights movement, the history of voter suppression and obstacles to the vote, especially for Black voters, is as critical today as ever. So to tell this story from the 1950s, it's a chapter of the voting rights struggle that we don't often hear, sort of the decade before, you know, the peak moment in the long civil rights struggle. And the historic work of Septima Clark just felt so important to bring into the now. And we're really working now in the 6 weeks between now and the election, you know, looking to the election and beyond, but building strategic relationships with voting rights organizations. We're going to be using it for some like virtual teach-ins. We're working a lot with the Georgia NAACP. We'll be doing an event next month, especially with the youth chapters, looking at this 9-minute film, telling a huge story in a short period of time, and encouraging. Their idea is to you know, get the young members, NAACP members on campuses and otherwise, to do their own short films of themselves in TikTok or other formats about, you know, sort of the voting rights struggle today. So it feels, you know, even though it was in the 50s, it just is such a story of now. And it's an honor to be able to, you know, be a part of having that story come into the now.
And that's a good segue to Mohammed, to your film that is also looking at voting. And yeah, so tell us about why now for your film.
Cool. So for those who don't know, my film is called The First because Abrar became the first Muslim woman to be elected in Virginia, and she became the first Libyan American to be elected in the US, in the entire US, and the first person below 25 to be elected in Virginia as well. So she's the first of multiple things. And I think this story was really important to tell right now because it's such an empowerment for women in general, for young women, for women from different backgrounds, women from other minority groups. So I feel like just having a film for a female running for office in such a young age from a different background, it's such an inspiration for young women in general, for people out there who are from different backgrounds, people from minority groups. And I actually, when I was filming Abrar with her campaign, she had a lot of interns who were high schoolers, and most of them were young women or females who were from different backgrounds, so African Americans or Asian Americans, Arab Americans, Hispanic Americans. So, and I can see how her running for office was such an inspiration for them. And I can see them like they work or like they're working for her and for her campaign and putting all of their efforts during their weekends, maybe like, you know, teenagers wants to hang out with their friends or family, but instead they went and work to help her to establish her campaign. So that was really inspiring to me personally to shoot this film and to tell this story to other people so other people can learn from.
Yeah, very inspiring, especially I can see for young people feeling like they are very much in history in the making.
Exactly.
Sam, tell us about the why now from your perspective. You talked a bit about the through line in your family. I'm also interested in maybe tying this in with your relationship to your mom and her activism.
Yeah, I featured my mom in the film. She was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and at the age of 19, her and her sister decided that they wanted to get as far away from the South as they could. They studied the Underground Railroad, and they literally took that path up north, and they got as far as Rochester, New York. And that's what it's kind of the whole African-American migration during the 30s, looking for better opportunities. In Rochester, my mom, she was a single mom, and had 3 kids, and really struggled to kind of provide for her family and find a place in the community. And so she decided to get together with a bunch of other mothers and organize, and basically they protested. They felt very strongly about things like education and voting rights, housing. She would do things like her and some of her white, more progressive friends would go looking for apartments. And of course, her white friends would get the apartments, she would not. And so they would go out and actually picket the landlord. And that was kind of an ongoing thing. And I grew up in that environment of just as a small child, watching my mom and her friends have meetings and make signs and get organized and strategize and that kind of thing. And that's just something I internalized, and in my own work, I kind of carried some of those important tactics to the work I did, and especially in my filmmaking. You know, I made this film before the whole Black Lives Matter thing kind of came to the forefront. But I have always felt that Black people are always trying to tell their stories, and they've always been very open in expressing how unique and how important their own lives are for everybody. You know, it's you know, I don't, you know, I think people tend not to see that we're being seen, and I don't think you can tell enough of these Black stories. And I think it's important for people to understand, for all people to understand that we're not kind of a monolithic, you know,
Yes.
race, that there's all sorts of, you know, cultures, attitudes, feelings. And so that's just something to be celebrated and something to be shared.
Comes through so beautifully in your film. I really love that is palpable. You know, the diverse array of experience in the African American community.
Right. And even throughout the generations, how it can
Right.
modify and change,
Right.
but still have the same sense of purpose.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit before on your comment in the film about you know, what stays and what gets left behind. You said, I'm always curious about what stays and what gets left behind when I think about the generations of my family. And I think we've talked a lot about what stays, but what gets left behind?
Well, you know, that's a good question. You know, I personally, growing up, we would drive, and I mentioned this in the film, that every summer we would drive back to Birmingham to visit with the family. And those were trips that I dreaded. I didn't have a sense of the South, you know, growing up in Rochester, New York, and, you know, being trapped in the South with, you know, surrounded by red clay and really pretty isolated in the rural South. And so I kind of knew already that I wasn't going to, I was always kind of future looking. That always represented for me the past, and I felt that just getting out in the world and exploring things and traveling was something that was very important to me. People that, in my family, at least in the South, they tend to stay in one place. They never
really
went
different experience than
Right.
what they were having.
Right. So I think, you know, as the generations formed, we kind of wanted to explore and spread out and, you know, go to Europe, go to Japan, you know, and I think that's one of the things that, you know, I think in the past, no one really wanted to do much. And I think we just decided that we're just going to explore.
How, this is interesting talking about this as a familial kind of and a generational thing, what stays and what gets left behind. Mohammed, I wanted to turn to you, and you know, your film is more about history in the making, and I wonder if you could talk about what you chose to have stay and what got left behind as you created the perspective on your story.
All right. So a lot of studies and surveys shows that young people don't even participate in voting in general, and they're like the least percentage of people who vote. And I believe in my film, I'm showing that young people are not only participating in voting, but we're also part of decision making. And that what we saw Abrar, her running for the seat. So now I think we just passed the voting problem, and now we're part of the solution, where we're part of the decision making in this country. Young people and people from people of color, people from other backgrounds. So everyone is part of the decision making of the American society and the American community. I believe that like like having young people to be part of the American politics is important, and it's not only for those old people who are making our future and our children's future and everyone. No, we have to be part of making the policies in the states as well.
Thank you. And was there we touched on this briefly, but was there, you know, if you could say briefly, because we're getting close to time, was there anything critical that you and Catherine, also please weigh in, had to leave out of the film, that you know, with any tough decisions on choice of footage in framing your story?
I feel like the hardest part is trying to keep, and from what I remember, I believe we spent a lot of time trying to stay focused on, because you know, it's taken from a larger film, and so, and then taking this little bit and focusing on sort of on like the goal of this film. I think that's the hardest. The part also working with footage, you know, we didn't have the original footage. And so working from this film when you don't have, you know, the raw interview or the raw, you know, the raw B-roll, I think that's the hardest part, is sort of working within those confines.
So you've got a really limited amount of images,
yeah,
in a
exactly.
way, not many hours, just
right, exactly.
The length.
Yeah, that's a hard part, but also, like I said before, just you want, I mean, these people are so important that you just want to keep everything in.
Yeah.
And yeah, especially, you know, Catherine has been working on this for a really long time, so she's just in love with everybody. So I think part of our job is me saying, but we can't keep that in, and she's saying we have to keep that in. And so that, you know, that sort of back and forth of finding that balance is always a thing between the editor and director. And
Catherine, do you want to say a little more about that? And maybe that could be kind of a segue into your telling us more about the literary project.
Sure. I think for me, the most difficult thing about editing the film was really wanting to include more of Septima Clark. And we pulled in, Lucy had some original interviews with Septima Clark from 1982 and 83, and that aren't in You Got to Move. So we pulled in that material, and that was really special and beautiful. Septima Clark, there's not much filmed footage of her. The magnitude of her importance for US history is beyond words. So I really wanted to put as much of her as possible, but the main focus of Lucy's interviews with her are not about the citizenship schools, which is what the short is about. So we were sort of, you know, when we started pulling in more of Septima Clark, then we kind of pulled the story a different direction. And that was more about Highlander Center, which is a really important story, but not the story that we were telling. So that was challenging, right? And hopefully that material can come to light in other ways. Certainly, so the literacy project, well, you know, we're still all working together with Lucy. There's a team of about 6 people. And I'd also like to mention Malkia Lydia, who is a DMV based, DC raised and DMV based filmmaker who's got a couple feature docs of her own on the way. And I think she's a very active member of Docs in Progress. Malkia Lydia did the archival research for this film that was more robust than any of the rest of it. She's a brilliant archival researcher and a story consultant, and really oversaw the digitizing of the materials. It was about a year-long process. So I wanted to honor her work and her role in this as well. So hopefully together with Lucy, we'll be able to do some podcasts or something else that will bring the Septima Clark materials into, you know, make them available to educational institutions, et cetera. And it overlaps the literacy project work because we started about 10 years ago making mid-length and short form documentary films that honor experiences of literacy, adult literacy, but also looking at education as a broader issue, and the importance and possibility of quality education for all. So all of this work feeds into that larger purpose. So working with schools and educators is a big part of what we do in grassroots social justice organizations. So it's really been, again, just a joy and an honor to be able to work with this material and with Lucy Phoenix and with Emmitt and with Malkia to bring it to today.
Thank you. And if people are interested in seeing You Got to Move, how would they go about that?
You Got to Move is distributed by Milestone Films. It's available as a DVD and also as a view on demand. For very affordable view on demand, but we're also working together with Lucy to release all of the chapters that are in her film. There's about 6 different chapters, this being the first one that's out. So those will roll out over the coming weeks and months. So people can write to us at the Literacy Project. The website is just theliteracyproject.org, and the email is theliteracyproject@gmail.com. So I can help make sure that anyone interested in viewing these films or teaching with them is able to access them.
Great, thank you. And briefly, next, we're just about out of time. Do you want to talk about other filmmakers, about your upcoming projects? Any final words, Mohammed?
All right, so I'm currently in Jordan. I'm filming my senior thesis film, which is called Touchline, and it tells the story of my grandfather. It's a fiction film. So my grandfather, who was in Palestine in 1948, and him trying to achieve his dream of being a professional football player or soccer player.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. Will it be a short or a long?
Yeah, it's a short film, so
Great.
Between 15 to 20 minutes.
Well, we're really looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
And
I hope I will participate in Washington, DC International Film Festival next year.
Yes. And Sam, what's coming up for you?
Actually, I'm between projects. I'm actually here in Seattle, and I'm working with the Seattle Social Justice Film Festival this year.
Oh, neat.
As an advisor and judge, and I'm getting used to the Seattle documentary community.
And Sam just moved to Seattle from living in the Washington area for years and years, just a month ago, right?
Yes.
And
I still want to promote Docs in Progress.
Yes.
In
Yes,
Silver
tell us a
Spring,
little bit about that.
Maryland.
Such a great resource.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful organization. We've been around for 15 years. We've changed a little bit. We have a brand new space on 2nd Avenue. Unfortunately, no one can take advantage of it right now, but soon we'll open up, and we have finally we have a screening room, which we're very excited about. We have a dedicated lab for editing and teaching courses. We teach courses from intro to documentary production, to editing, to fundraising, you name it. We have all sorts of resources for emerging documentary filmmakers and established documentary filmmakers.
This is a wonderful organization in Silver Spring, so any of you local documentarians, I urge you to take advantage of it. And Emmitt, finally, what are you working on? What's next for you?
I have a film coming out in October called The Garcia Family, which is about a man in St. Louis, Missouri, who has been living in a church for the last 3 years. He's taken sanctuary in the church so as to not be deported and separated from his family. So that comes out in late October. And then I'm filming another film called Sister Doulas, which is about these heroic women around the U.S. fighting infant and maternal mortality in the African-American community.
You all have some great stories emerging. I can't wait to see these projects. I thank you so much for being with us. It was really a joy to talk to you. And to those of you out there viewing, thank you for being with us. We also have another video available if you would like to see the interviews with the other MetroShorts filmmakers or the interviews with filmmakers from our Shortcuts program. So on that note, we say goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.